you are watching from and introduce yourself. And we'll get started here in just a second. We've got a great presentation today and a great group, and we are glad that you are with us as well. Welcome, Kimberly from Canadian, Texas. I'm from Dumas, Texas originally, so I know just where Canadian is, and glad that you are here with us.
In 1999.
I'm not sure where that came from, but I know who that was. Ron Hollifield's talking to us there. Oh, well, I hope you took it easy on him, Kimberly, if y'all were playing my old alma mater, that's for sure. Well, let's get started. Krissa, we're talking about building trust in local government today, and I just wanted to get connected with you in this and ask, what have you observed in your years working in Chamber of Commerce and then working, of course, for SGR? What have you observed about the importance of trust in local government?
You know, Mike, I will actually reflect back on the last 2 years at the Transforming Local Government, or TLG, conferences, and hearing some of the really incredibly innovative things that cities are doing to enhance their services and their communities. And all of that, I mean, in every situation and every story we hear, there's a level of trust that equipped those individuals to be able to have that innovation, those ideas in the first place, and then to be able to carry those through to execution. And so I think it is pretty fundamental from what I've seen.
Yeah, that's really true. You know, I've had city managers say to me that, you know, the quality of leadership precedes the ability to innovate. And I think that's exactly true. Those are tied together. So we are very privileged today to have two presenters with us that are, you know, I'm going to say experts in this matter of trust. First, David Swindell, who is the director of the Center for Urban Innovation at Arizona State University and also on the faculty there. And he is joined by Liz Steward, who is the VP of Marketing and Research for Invisio. And I heard Liz speak last year at our AFI Vision Council meeting, and she just did a tremendous job. And I thought the research was so compelling. I really was excited about it and excited to have her present here at one of our webinars. So David and Liz, welcome. We're really honored that you've joined us, and we want to turn it over to you and hear what you have to share with us about this.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, it is a pleasure to be back with you. It feels like a long time since we were in town put together. And we just did a tiny little bit of the research, the trust research that we've been working on with Arizona State University. So I am very excited to do a little bit of a deeper dive with you all today. So you already gave us a nice introduction there. I'll let David introduce himself as well. My name's Liz Steward. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Research for Invisio. We are a GovTech company. We're a private sector company, but we're a mission-driven company. So I get the pleasure of wearing two hats in my role. First of all, I lead our marketing team at Invisio, and then the second hat I get to wear is running some of our more mission-aligned projects, and this work that we've done with Arizona State University very much fits into that bucket. So I'm pretty excited to talk about it today. And David?
I'm so pleased to be with you all today to get to share something that is a real passion of mine, and the importance of trust and trust in government institutions, and how it is that we protect democracy. It's obviously a very timely topic, one that's rattling around not just the United States, but also many countries around the world. So we're seeing this happen internationally. We're seeing it happen within the United States at different levels of government. So I am really excited to share with you some of the findings from the work that we've been doing and talk about some of the action steps that we can start pursuing. I direct the Center for Urban Innovation, and this is work that we have is near and dear to our hearts as part of the mission of Arizona State University, which I'll talk a little bit about later on. Okay.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm just going to go through the agenda. I love a good agenda, so you know what we're going to cover in the next 40 minutes roughly. So David and I are going to do a little bit of scene setting, like why are we talking about trust? Why is Invisio and Arizona State University specifically talking to you about trust? What do we mean by that? And then I'm going to talk a little bit about this unique partnership that we put together a couple of years ago. It's a public-private academic partnership, two GovTech companies Arizona State University, and 3 cohort cities that were provided by the National League of Cities who are interested in exploring this concept of trust. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then what are the things that we learned through doing that project? So what are the indicators of trust? Yes, it's possible to measure trust. And what are the key takeaways from that research, and how can they actually be applied in your communities? And then we'll talk about next steps and things that are coming from ASU on this topic, and how you can get involved with some of the things that we're talking about. So David, do you want to take us away?
Okay, you want to advance us there? So why? What's so important about trust? There's a lot of work that's been written going back to ancient Greece about the importance of trust in local government. And I'm not going to go down through that entire history, don't worry. But the importance of trust for us today and what we're talking about is making sure that people are actually going to have the confidence that the institutions to whom we pay taxes are actually going to deliver the services that we want them to deliver. That confidence, that trust that we have in those organizations is why we actually are amenable to paying the taxes. The fundamental premise of democracy requires a certain degree of trust. Now, it's trust properly understood. It's not blind trust. That's a dangerous road in and of itself, blindly trusting government institutions, but rather trust that people are going to behave a certain way. We need this in the marketplace. We need to make sure people are going to behave in a certain way in the marketplace. We need the same thing with regards to how they behave on the streets. We need civility. Otherwise, we fall into what those philosophers talked about as the state of nature, which is just war on everybody. You know, we're always worried about protecting what is ours. And while we don't see that level of fraying of the civic fabric, we do see some fraying of that. And we can map this against a numerous different surveys over the last couple of decades that have measured this decline in trust, decline in confidence in government, decline in trust in each other. So this is an important topic because it goes to the fundamental basis of what we do in government. These surveys have been tracked by Pew, by Gallup, by reputable organizations for, like I said, decades, and we've seen this consistent decline. It seems to have bottomed out over the last 15 years or so, but it's bottomed out at a really low level. The question is, how far? Where's the tipping point before you start losing the ability to govern and before you lose your civic space? That's a tipping point we don't want to find out about. We don't want to get to that point. And there are countries that have reached that point. Somalia is a really good example of that. When you get to a point where there is no functioning government, we have other examples of that historically and currently here in the world as well. But if we advance to the next slide, you can see that in the U.S., trust varies by what kind of government institution we're talking about. When we talk about the government, that's kind of lazy thinking. And sometimes people think of the national government, but for me, we think of the government, I'm thinking local governments. Different people think about the government in different ways. When we drill down and we ask them about their confidence in the federal government, specifically the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch, we see that, okay, there's different levels of trust there, and it's all pretty low. If we talk about local government, actually trust has historically always been higher than it has been for other levels of government, which is great. Except if we go to the next slide, even that is beginning to go down. We've seen a drop from our average, and the average itself has actually been coming down for the last 10 years or so. And again, there's not like a number, a trust score. It's the official trust score. There's a lot of different ways of measuring this, and we'll talk a little bit about how we did this. But the trends are what are important. The trends that we're seeing are consistent declines in these trust scores, and trying to slow that, to flatten it, and then ultimately to bend the curve back into a positive direction, to rebuild trust. That's really what we're after here. And we're going to share with you some of our information, but solicit some feedback from you all as well at the end of this. So you want to advance to the next slide? Just to highlight that what that decline has been in the local level from last year against our average, but the average itself is coming down also, which is a little disconcerting as well. Okay, I'll hand it back to you, Liz.
Yeah, I should have said David and I are going to tag team through this presentation a little bit, so no one has any excuse to get bored of listening to either one of us. And we can try and stop each other from talking too much because we both get quite passionate and we've been working together for years and we can both talk. So forgive us going back and forth. So I wanted to share this number because what David's talking about is probably not a surprise to anyone on this call. Like, there's been hundreds of column inches written about the decline in trust in government. And what I found really interesting, this is a survey that we at Invisio ran with Government Leadership Solutions in 2023, and it was a survey on local government leadership pipeline and some of the challenges that we're seeing in terms of bringing up the next generation of local government leaders. And we asked the question, what is the biggest challenge that you see facing local governments in the next 5 years? The number one biggest challenge from local government leaders themselves was a lack of trust. And so I bring this up just to say, I think we all know that this is a problem. And it was interesting to me to see that in local government, you're feeling that problem as well. You actually are starting to feel the effects of that lack of trust. So just I want to give a little bit more scene setting before we go into the specifics of the partnership that we put together. And this is not intended to be a sales pitch at all, but I think it's probably helpful to just understand where ASU plays into this and where Invisio plays into it as well. So I mentioned that Invisio is a mission-driven company. So our mission is to build trusted public institutions. Now, that's been our mission for many years. It predates me. I feel like every GovTech company under the sun is talking about trust right now. And when I joined Invisio, I think it was actually in my interview that we were talking about trust and how Invisio helps to build trust in what we do. And I asked the question, do we? How do you know? Like, it's a big assumption to make that we actually build trust. And that started these conversations of like, well, how do we actually measure trust? Is there a way that we can do it? Is there a way that we could help local governments measure trust in their own communities? And it really started off a little bit selfishly. It's like, do we understand the impact that we're having as a mission-driven company? And so what we do at Invisio is we help local governments to put their plans into action, whether it's a strategic plan or affordable housing plan or climate action, and then track the progress of those plans, and then importantly, report to elected officials and the community via interactive dashboards what is happening in local government, the progress that's being made. So there's a big transparency piece. And so we were making this assumption that transparency leads to trust. And it took a couple of years to go from that conversation to actually starting to work with David. And me and David first got on a call and I was like, well, I have this research and I have this idea. And what do you think about starting to build a trust index and talking about this issue and really helping local governments understand trust in their own communities? And David was off camera and I thought he just thinks I'm an idiot. And then he said, there's a pause and he said, I love it. and that was the beginning of our partnership with ASU and some of the work that has followed. So I'll let David give a little bit of a background to ASU and your charter as well.
So I'm super excited about this topic. You might tell it in my voice, but it also, I'm very fortunate to be at Arizona State University, which is not like other universities. We've been, I think, for 10 years running now, rated #1 in innovation in the country in terms of higher education. But a lot of that ties to our mission statement, our charter. This is what I've highlighted here on the slide that defines that we are a public research university, but the research that we do is research that is applied. I'm not a theoretician. I'm all about making sure that we move our research into the actionable area for managers, particularly city managers, to be able to act on hardcore, empirically grounded research. And that's what this effort is all about. We take responsibility for, for the quality of that research, as well as how it's helping our communities. So measuring trust, being able to find positive factors that lead to positive changes in trust in our communities is just part of the DNA of this institution. And that's not the case with a lot of other research institutions. So I'm very fortunate to be in this particular place at this particular time, getting to work with Liz and some other great folks on something that we think is critically important. So what is it? I mentioned a little bit at the outset that the trust that we're talking about is basically confidence in an institution. It's not the same as trust between two people. That's a different kind of trust. Individual level trust is a different kind of trust. This is trust of a more diffuse nature. It's trust in an institution. The institution is going to behave in a way that justifies my support of that institution, that we have an agreed upon set of rules, that everybody's going to comply with those rules. I have trust that everybody's going to do that. But I also need to have the trust that the officials who are representing me in that governmental institution are going to be acting on my behalf. I may disagree with how they're getting there, but I trust that they are working for the greater good of the community that they're representing. Now, a lot of what we're focusing on initially is trust by individuals of local government institutions. That's not the only kind of trust that's important. And in fact, Liz has already highlighted with the 58% number a moment ago, the elected officials, local elected officials, are recognizing that the decline in trust is affecting their ability to work for the public. Identifying what is it that the public wants is part of the problem. So it's hard to garner trust to do the things that people want when, in fact, the people, the citizens, are kind of all over the map in terms of what it is that they want. So the question of who's trusting whom, well, we have different levels of analysis for that. One is the individual level, and that's where we're going to focus on initially, individuals trusting in local government. Then, time permitting, we'll talk a little bit about elected officials trust of administrators within local government. So how is the trust working within the institution itself, not just of the institution, but within the institution? Liz, I'm going to move us up.
Yeah.
So, okay, this is yours.
Okay, so lots of preamble there, and now we're going to get into a little bit about specifically what we did in 2022 with this partnership between ASU, a couple of GovTech companies, and a cohort of cities from the National League of Cities. It's a little complicated as to how we came together. So the very condensed version was that Invisio was already talking to ASU about building this trust index. National League of Cities had put together a capstone team with 3 cohort cities, and we'll talk just a little bit about them in a minute, and Polko, and they were also interested in trust. They all perceived themselves to have issues with trust in their community and different levels of experience in trying to go out and measure it. And because we're all a small community in the GovTech community, we ended up kind of merging our efforts and working together to put this sort of very unique partnership together. And our vision was not just to understand the why is trust declining. There's been lots written about that, but really how do we do something to affect it? What do we do about it? And so David, whenever I speak to David, one of the things that I love about working with you is that you're not interested so much in the theory as the practice. It's like, how do we take what we've learned and actually do something with it? That's the research and action piece in the title of this session. And so our vision as a group was to improve quality of life by identifying where trust is breaking down in our community. So where is it breaking down? Where is the problem? But then importantly, providing empirically grounded action steps to strengthen it. So how do we actually take what we've learned and do something about it? So I haven't put the specific communities up here because I didn't ask permission to use their names in this presentation, but I did want to highlight the fact that we had 3 very diverse communities for this work. They were diverse by geography, by their demographic makeup, and by their size. And like I say, they had this commonality. They all felt that they had kind of various issues of trust that they wanted to explore in their communities. Ooh. A little lag here on my slides, bear with me. And so here's what we did. So before we go into the results of it, this is exactly the steps that we took. And this was about a 6-month project. We started by compiling an annotated bibliography. So ASU did that work, David and his team, and they pulled all the existing research on the topic of trust in local government. From there, and then working with the cohort cities, some of whom had done quite extensive work and research on their own into trust, we built what we called a trust map. So what are the indices of trust? And then we built our draft trust index. So what do we think of the proxy measures of trust? How would we go and measure it? And we had the survey scientists from Polko help us draft those survey questions. And then we put the survey out into the field. So each of the cohort cities took it out to their residents, used a lot of different survey methodologies. It was out for about a month, and we had almost 3,000 respondents, so a pretty good response rate. And then we took that data from those completed surveys, and we identified individual community level insights, so things that the communities could learn about their own communities and where they could improve things. But we also wanted to test this broader index. Could we bring a broader index that all local governments could use and identify like these key drivers of trust? What are the key indicators? What are the constructs of trust that really will help local governments actually do something about it and improve it in their communities? And here they are. These are our indicators of trust. So we basically identified 14 indicators, and we mapped those indicators into 4 larger categories. And each of them had questions around it. And then we had 2 questions to measure overall trust. Overall, how much do you trust the city of Vancouver, the city of Phoenix? So these were our 4 categories. They were competency, openness, integrity, and equity. And you can see in each one of these bubbles, we've got about 4 indicators that are being measured there. So it was a pretty interesting exercise. But then what we did is we looked at the key drivers. So these were all important. What was interesting about this work is that we found that the theory matched the practice. Everything we thought was going to be a good proxy measure for trust turned out to be a good indicator of trust. And then we did a key driver analysis. So I'm going to skip over a little bit about the measurements here. So there were 3 indicators here and 2 categories that had a much bigger bearing on overall resident trust than the others. So I'm going to throw this out to the group. What do you think were the 2 big categories that had the biggest impact on trust? They were all important. All 14 were important, but 2 were more important than the other. So is it competency, openness, integrity, or equity? If you can throw your ideas into the chat. Openness and equity, interesting. Equity and integrity. Okay, openness, integrity. The SGR team know the answer to this, so that's cheating. You're in the presentation, but you can integrity and openness. Okay, perfect. Someone's got it absolutely spot on. So the 2 categories that had the biggest bearing on trust was openness and integrity. Interestingly, a lot of people said equity. Equity wasn't as big a driver of trust as we expected. And then the 3 areas that we were measuring, the 3 key indicators that had the largest impact on trust were these. So informing residents, generally acting in the best interest of the community, and taking responsibility for the actions taken by the local government. Not sure if that's a surprise to anyone. So I'm going to hand it over to David now to start talking about what we do with this information. What do we do knowing that those are the key drivers of trust and that all 14 of those indicators that we looked at actually did matter and that it was a very comprehensive and viable index that we could go and use. So what do we do with that information and how do we actually use it to provide some advice to local governments?
Yeah, it's fascinating data to begin with, but in order to move that to some kind of actionable step, we needed to figure out some of the factors that were driving the trust. And one of them jumped out at us as clearly who was more informed were people who were more trusting. The more information citizens had about what their local government was doing, the more likely they were to be trusting of their government. And here we have 2 different questions that we're looking at here: overall trust, overall confidence in your local government, and how much of the time do you think you can trust your local government to do what is right. So that's what the 2 different color bars are. So you can see on the very far right, those who are very informed about what's going on in their community are the folks that are most likely to actually have confidence in the community. So just focusing on that one little piece leads to a very clear action item. So our first takeaway we want to talk about is the role of transparency. Transparency is, again, we've known this for a long time. The entire reform tradition of public administration and local government from the early 20th century is premised on the importance of transparency, because we were trying to get away from a pretty corrupt past where there was no transparency. So you want to advance that slide here? One of the things that we've learned from citizen satisfaction surveys, from performance indicator research over the last couple of decades is if you only knew how well we were doing, you'd be really satisfied. Well, why aren't people satisfied? Well, most of the time, because we don't tell them what it is that we're doing. We don't tell them these are the projects that are underway. This is how the changes have been made. This is how many potholes we have filled. This is any of those basic performance indicators that many communities collect. We don't share in a systematic and comprehensible way to the general public. So they don't really know what we're up to in our cities to know whether or not they should be satisfied. And of course, satisfaction is highly correlated with trust. Okay, the next slide. It's a little pale there. So with regards to how to do this, there's this common thread was that informing individuals, informing people about this is important. We'll talk about more about that in just a second. But first off, you have to have the information and making sure that that information is publicly available. Well, what information are we talking about? So making sure that you have information to share. It could be policy, it could be programmatic. One of those areas that we do a lot of work in is with regards to performance measurement and benchmarking. So the next slide. We run a program here in the Phoenix metro area called the Valley Benchmark Communities Project. We have 13 of the largest municipalities that participate with us in this effort to comparatively benchmark. We've been doing this for years now. We just released our latest one back in July, our latest issue, and there was a link to that at the end of the presentation that we'll share with you. But it allows us to actually show performance as it changes over time, and as you compare to peer cities within your organization. We use the Invisio platform for this project. That's another way that we got kind of tangled up with Invisio, was we were collecting this information and we needed a way for the different member jurisdictions to be able to pull the information to create their own reports. Those reports are really useful for managers to understand where there are changes. They can learn from their neighbors when there's a big increase or decrease in a particular indicator. Why is that? They can see how they're doing themselves over time. They can compare themselves against peer cities or both at the same time. So it's a very flexible way of sharing that information, but they can share it with the public. That was, in fact, the original motivation behind why we actually did VBC, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But you can do this on a whole host of different services, police response times, which you would think would be easy to measure that. But even with our 13 proximate jurisdictions to each other, that was one of the toughest things we had to do, because no one agreed on when do you start the clock to measure the response time. And so getting everybody to make sure that we're all measuring the same thing over time takes a little bit. But we also do services like, on the next slide, water waste and sewer, diversion to recycling, or turnaround time of the permitting process. So we can identify changes and over time and learn from what was it that changed. Why did this particular jurisdiction improve on this indicator? What did they do to get that response time down? Okay, next, one more. So the reason that we did that was if we didn't, somebody else would. And of course, we've got the situation going on right now where if there is an absence of information, social media will fill that vacuum. Well, several years ago, there was no performance indicator system here at all. The cities may have done some, but they didn't really advertise it very well. And instead, the media stepped in and they did an attempt at comparative benchmarking and tried to gauge the cities and how they were doing. And it was awful. It was absolutely awful. They're not trained to do that. So we took it upon ourselves. That was part of the original impetus to build the VBC program, was to come together and systematically do that. And we've learned so much as a result of having pursued that, because we want to make sure that we control the narrative. We control the narrative with regards to good, solid empirical information that the public and managers can act upon. And it builds confidence that, oh, we know what's going on in the community. Having the data and sharing the data are two different things, however. So another part of this is communicating. Liz?
Thanks, David. Yeah, I love the way you describe being tangled up with Invisio. It's not that bad. So yeah, our second takeaway from the research was really around the importance of communication. When we talk about informing residents, transparency is great, but transparency can be very passive. So how do we actually actively communicate with our constituents? And so I've got a couple of examples here. These are actually Invisio customers because we've lived and breathed this for a long time. We obviously work with local governments to help them put information like the VBC data that David shown, put their performance measures up on interactive dashboards, and they've put them out there for everyone to see. But some of the conversations that we end up having are, well, we want to put this out quietly and see how it goes, or we just want to kind of tick that box. Now, most local governments aren't like that, but transparency is scary, and then actively telling people where to go and look and where to find information is even scarier, and then putting it out there and welcoming feedback on it. So we put this as a separate point because transparency doesn't really matter if nobody knows that it's there and if you're not actively telling people where to look, and then importantly, what it means. So, you know, we talk about this a lot at Invisio. David and I talk about this a lot. You know, having data requires storytelling, it requires context, active communication, requires more than just telling people where to look, but also what it is that you're looking at. And so you have to go where your community is and use all existing channels available to do that. I've given one example here. This is the city of Mansfield, Texas. I have no idea if they're on the call today. I hope they don't mind me sharing this. This is the photo that they sent us. And this is their interactive dashboard that they created with Invisio, and they've put it on all of their business cards and all of the pieces of collateral that they give out to communities, with a QR code so people can actually go and see their strategic priorities. So they're really like living and breathing that active communication piece and being super transparent. I want to give another example here. This is the village of Roselle in Illinois, a wonderful example of both transparency and active communication. So they're using all of their kind of existing channels to tell people that they have an interactive dashboard where their residents can go and see what their local government is doing for them against the strategic priorities and how they're performing against them. They've got a nice QR code there at the bottom of the mayor's message, lots of context. And then you can see the dashboard itself also has lots of context. It has written narrative, it has explainers of the data at the bottom of each one of their graphs to tell you where it came from. And if you click up on the progress bars there, you can dig into more information on each one of those. So just another really great example of openness and building trust. And so I just wanted to give a couple of examples of different communication techniques. I'm not a local government communications expert, so I'm not going to preach about exactly the right way to do it for your community, but just to point out the difference between dissemination tools, like telling people something's there, and then actively encouraging feedback and active participation in the data. And so we've got, you know, I think it's probably no surprises, social media, email, text alerts, things to push information out, and then more responsive for social media, actually responding to people who have questions, smart websites, interactive dashboards that we've spoken about a lot, and then feedback tools. And so we talk a lot in general about two-way communication also in our dashboards. It's a really important piece of community engagement and helping residents feel informed. David.
So our third takeaway really ties kind of back into the first two in terms of having the information, the transparency, and the communication. But the third one is taking ownership. This is how we build confidence amongst citizens in our local government. Go ahead and advance that. You know, this is taking responsibility, and politically, that's kind of risky. You've probably the most famous illustration of this, of course, is President Truman and his famous sign on his desk about the buck stops here. He will take ultimate responsibility for all the decisions that are made by the federal government, which is pretty extensive, maybe a bit more than we need to, but it's not simply taking the blame. That's the important thing we talk about here when we're taking responsibility. It does require an explanation to the public of how things went wrong and how it is that we're going to fix that. What are the corrective steps that we're going to take? And then sharing progress on fixing those things. That's, again, we're building confidence. The confidence is what leads to additional trust. So making sure that we create a system of accountability as opposed to blame, right? That is critical, not simply for the public, but also for our employees within our local government organizations. Building trust that they can innovate without being punished. And one example of this, it doesn't have to, deal with nuclear war. It can be something that's a much more tight problem, such as an example for where a city manager stepped in and basically took the responsibility for a dog having been euthanized by mistake, and how to protect the animals in the animal control department that they had, making sure that that wouldn't happen again. Taking responsibility, stepping up and changing the system to help the public understand that that's not going to happen again. And that builds a great deal of trust, particularly on something that's as visible and visceral to the public as animal control. If it's something like procurement, that's not quite as sexy or as attention getting as animal control is to the public. So those areas where you can take step forward, build that system of accountability and responsibility, that's what's going to breed the confidence amongst employees as well as citizens. That's what builds trust. It's that confidence. And how do we build the confidence? We take responsibility for the actions of our organization. Liz, do you want to do this one, or did you want me to do this one? Sorry.
Yeah, I can take this one if you want, David. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
What David and I wanted to reiterate here is really that trust matters. We know it matters. You've said in surveys that you're feeling the effects of it in your communities. We've seen the stats that show us trust in decline. And so we've just put a couple of examples here of like very high level, high profile examples of where trust is having an impact on our communities. And the first one is obviously in the pandemic. There was lots written about this, that the governments across the world that had higher trust, that where they could measure higher trust with the population, had a better COVID response. And by that, I mean lower infection rate, fewer deaths. There's lots and lots of pieces on it. And this is just the Edelman one that I pulled. And then the other one that I wanted that my team spent a lot of time talking about and we were interested in was the US Surgeon General's advisory from last year around the epidemic of loneliness and the importance of institutional trust more broadly, but institutional trust is one piece of that. And the importance of that to improve community health outcomes. They were specifically talking about loneliness and isolation. But more broadly, if you actually read the US Surgeon General's piece, it talks a lot about trust and why we need to rebuild that in order to live longer, fuller, better lives, have lower costs in our healthcare, and generally improve community health outcomes. So trust matters.
So far we've been really focused on citizens' trust in local government, but as I mentioned at the outset, there's a lot of other avenues of trust that are also important. One of which is local elected officials' trust in city administrators. And this is an area where, again, we've been seeing some rough waters, if media is to be believed. Belief in media, another area where we've seen a decline in trust. But this is some research that we've been doing recently on this particular question. The good news is that there's still a lot of trust of elected officials in terms of their trust in staff, which is good. But there's some weirdness also. So in the next slide, we've got a high degree of respondents that agree that they would consult with staff. Okay, so there's trust, there's willingness to consult. But then we also see that only 58% of respondents strongly agreed that staff require oversight. So I say only 58%, almost, this is 3/5, think that the staff requires more oversight. And then finally, the weird aspect here is that 80%, 4 out of 5 of the respondents agreed that staff need to have their self-interest curbed. Now, I'm using kind of a silly tongue-in-cheek graphic here. It's not about embezzlement or anything like that. That's not what's motivating it, but it's this idea that staff are kind of lone rangers going off and pursuing their own political interest or policy interest and not following what the council is suggesting that they be doing. But that seems to conflict with their trust in staff and their willingness to work with staff. So there is this tension that we're seeing in there, and I think we're seeing some of that bubble up within a lot of our communities across the country. So this is another line of work. We have another report coming out on this pretty soon that we'll be sure and share the link to with everybody. And just want to kind of talk about our next steps, which really highlight the survey, the leadership survey that Liz is going to share with you in just a second, a little background on that. We also have the link here to the Valley Benchmark communities if you would like to take a deeper dive just to see what it is that we're up to. But feel free to reach out to me. My email, david.swindell@asu.edu, is on there. And if you want to get more information about the Trust Index questions, the survey we utilized originally, Liz has her email address there as well to reach out to her on that. But now she has a request for you.
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, so I just wanted to make a request to everyone on the call. The 2025 State of Local Government Leadership Pipeline survey is launching, I think, in 2 days. Actually, it opens, and so it's going to be open. I think it's open for 4 weeks. So this is the survey that I spoke about, where we kind of looked at that 58% number. We're doing this in partnership with Government Leadership Solutions again, and the ICMA and GFOA are part of this effort too this year. So if you have, it's a very quick survey to take. If you have 5 minutes, please do take it. I think we'll be sending the slides out, Mike. I'll look for confirmation on that. But there's a QR code here to take that survey, and it opens on the 18th. So I think in 2 days' time. But the more respondents we get, the better. It would be great to be able to see whether trust is still the #1 challenge that local government leaders are seeing, and also give us a couple of years of data to benchmark things in the survey. So please do take it if you have the time. And I think that's us. So Mike, I'm going to throw it over to you to Q&A and also to answer my question about whether we can share the slides with everyone on the call.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you so much, Liz and David. I have been really anticipating this webinar, and it did not disappoint me at all. Amazing information and really inspiring, and thank you so much. And yes, we will be sending the slides out, and so you'll have a chance to use that QR code if you want to and participate in that survey. And I want to ask a question that I have, but first of all, no, Krista, you have a question. So let's go to your question, Krista, and then I've got a follow-up question to that.
Great. Well, first of all, David and Liz, thank you once again. Great presentation, super insightful and informative. Really got my wheels spinning quite a bit. But I couldn't help but wonder, are you also doing any measurement or analysis of the trust between a city manager trusting the elected officials, and then also like the staff trusting the city management?
So the first opportunity that we had was the survey of elected officials. So surveying elected officials, city council members, is really tricky, and there's a reason there's so few of those studies out there. So we kind of tackled that one first, but we do want to actually go to the other direction. We want to figure out city manager trust in staff, but also city manager trust in the elected officials and city staff. We don't know how far down in the hierarchy we can get with this. It'll depend on funding, but we'll do what we can to get as far down into that as possible so that we can understand those dynamics of trust. Because organizational trust, for us working in the field of local government, that is really critical. Yes, we're serving the public, but in order to serve the public, we have to have really good, solid, well-oiled machines in order to do that, and that requires trust. Trust is the lubricant of any good organization, and if we can't trust our fellow staff, our leaders within the organization, it's going to be really hard for us to deliver the services to the public, whose trust we also need.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like the idea of measuring it both ways, seeing that trust going both ways. But excellent presentation overall. And I think, did we get any more questions in the chat?
I don't think
we got a lot of compliments, I think.
Yes, a lot of compliments. David, I have a question for you. I really loved the point about when something has gone wrong, that we have to take accountability for it. We need to give a statement of what corrective steps we're taking, and then, of course, updates on how that's going. That flies, though, in the face of what we often see of sort of stonewalling, I'm not going to say any more than what you already know, sort of thing. What keeps us from just pulling back the curtain, so to speak, taking responsibility and giving an explanation of, how we're going to keep that from happening next time?
As everybody on this webinar knows, the city manager position is a weird position. It's a pretty unique kind of position. You're into that netherworld between the administration and the politics, right? And taking the blame for something, taking responsibility for something can sometimes be perceived as a weakness that, oh, you did something wrong, you must be punished. That doesn't have to be the case. And so building that accountability, this is why it's not a blame game. It's not meant to be a blame game, but it's meant to have a system of accountability, because that's where it's in a system of accountability that serves as the foundation for the confidence that you're paying attention. Yes, there are going to be mistakes. Building in a culture of innovation in an organization requires that we have the room to make mistakes. We have to learn from those mistakes, though. So taking responsibility, taking accountability for when things do go wrong, and then pointing out the learning that happened from that, I think is how you spin it from blame to actually a positive outcome for the community, for your council, for your staff. It also creates a great deal of confidence in your staff that you are protecting them, because they're probably the ones that implemented whatever it was that went wrong. It may have been one of their ideas. We want to encourage new ideas, but we do have to have that safe space within which our organizations are allowed to make mistakes. And we want to obviously minimize them, but we want to make sure that we learn from them and then protect people so that they have the confidence to suggest change, to suggest new ideas and innovations within our organization so that we can better serve our publics.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing insight and really an important issue for leaders. And I'm thinking of a situation in a city where this didn't really have to do with innovation, but it was a mistake. And leadership owned that mistake and really did just what you said. They said, okay, here's how we're going to change it. And, although there was some fallout from it, as there had to be, it wasn't extensive.
Yeah.
It wasn't extensive because they handled it that way. So I really appreciate this webinar so much. Krissa, any other questions that we have before we close out?
We got one more question, great question in the chat from Julie. She said, we hear questions about how there being resident feedback, survey data, et cetera, will be used and how they will know it mattered. Do you have any experience or data to explain that to the residents? So maybe examples of how you communicate that back to the residents on how.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of well, first off, a nice tech solution that has been implemented in several communities is being able to report something that somebody sees out there. The famous example, of course, is the potholes. It could be any number of things. It could be roaming animals. It could be any number of these issues that local government is responsible for within the community, where you have an app that you can report that to the city. What that can do is lead to an immediate acknowledgement of having received that comment. Then when that comment goes to the appropriate department, another feedback opportunity, and this is all electronic, so this doesn't require staff necessarily having to type out a message, but rather an automated response. But then also when that case gets opened and closed are also feedback opportunities. So that's one way that we can automate something like that, where we crowdsource with more eyes on the street through our citizens, the opportunity for us to better target our resources to fixing problems that they're identifying for us to fix for them. So it becomes much more of a co-productive opportunity when we have that kind of feedback. The other option is when we have like a town hall meeting, for instance, we're actually bringing people together, maybe in focus groups or small discussion groups. That's more labor intensive, but you get really much deeper qualitative information about how things are working in the community. That also requires that we turn that around, and that can be turned around through some of those other technological channels that we mentioned earlier that are sharing the information back out. So it's an iterative process. We need to share, we need to collect information from them, and we need to provide feedback. So it's always a cycle going back and forth. It's a conversation between local government and its citizens. And again, that breeds confidence. Confidence breeds trust. So I think that that represents an opportunity that a lot of communities don't. Most of our communities are sending information out. If they're doing much at all on that, they're sending information out. They're not. We don't do as good a job about listening. And even those who do listen don't always close the loop by sharing the information back out. Because if we're holding multiple city, town halls and multiple community focus groups, what we need to do is synthesize all that information from those different community groups and share them back out to the community as a whole. That's where we typically, don't close the loop. We don't follow through on that. But that's where I think people would see that my participation mattered. They listened, they heard. They may not have done what I suggested, but they listened, they heard, and they included me in the process. That again is how we build that confidence that's going to yield better trust and a healthier civic fabric that protects the democracies that we're so fond of.
And I just wanted to add one more on that, if I might, Mike.
Sure. Yes.
The other way, well, we see cities who are like really embracing transparency. What we often see is that they'll include community survey data as their performance measures, their outcome measures against their strategic priorities. So it's really a way of them saying, this is what the community is saying and how it aligns with our strategic priorities. We listened and we aligned our strategic priorities with where we're at with the community. So and very transparently, whether the number is going up, going down, whether it's good, whether it's bad, community satisfaction on the quality of our parks, community satisfaction on a sense of belonging, and actually aligning those to strategic goals that the city is working towards, and having that data very transparently up on their dashboards, and then tracking it year over year to see if they're actually working to improve things.
Oh yeah, excellent point, Liz. We talk about the fact that as a city is engaging in a strategic visioning process, they need community input at the beginning before visioning starts taking place by elected leaders. But then also you need community input throughout so that you can make, adjustments accordingly. And so that's a really big part of it. Well, thank you so much, David and Liz. It's been a really informative and well done webinar. Thank you for your time. And I just look forward to continuing to work with both your organizations in the future. We really appreciate the work y'all are doing. And thank you to all of you that have joined with us today. Hope you have enjoyed this. Special shout out to Lisa Shook, who is our behind the scenes coordinator, makes everything happen. And so on behalf of SGR and Krissa and everybody as a part of this, thank you for joining us. We'll see you down the road.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.